Hey, everybody. Welcome to an episode of Dirt Nap City, the podcast about interesting dead people. And today we have one of the most interesting dead people around. But before I introduce that person and give some clues, I'm going to introduce one of the most interesting alive people around. Alex, everybody. Give him a hand.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I've heard recently some people reluctant to listen to our show because they think that they kind of get stuck on the word dead, and they think that it's maybe going to be a gruesome show, and we're going to talk about how people died or some of the details of their death, and that's not the dead parts.
Like those old snuff films.
Yeah, Faces of
We're
Death.
A snuff podcast.
It's not the audio version of Faces of Death.
Right. You're not going to see anything that will give you nightmares, hopefully, except for us.
The part about being the dead is just categorizes them.
Yeah, and also I feel like it you can't really make the podcast about interesting deceased people. That doesn't sound very good. It's to the point, right? It's very direct. That's how we try to be.
Absolutely. But we really don't spend much time talking about how. Sometimes we don't even mention how these people died. We mention the year that they died.
Yeah,
that's about
if
it.
we know the year. We might not even know the year. Wikipedia might have said need citation for that part.
Sometimes, like in the case of Amelia Earhart, we don't even really know if they died.
True. They could still be alive. In which case, she would be the first interesting alive person. Very old, but interesting nonetheless.
Amelia, if you're listening.
Yeah, reach out. We'll have you on as a guest. You can.
What's the email address that she can write us at?
Not at Dirt Nap City, and that could also, in your case, Amelia, not dead at Dirt Nap City. So, for today, I have someone that definitely falls into our category of a person everybody's heard of but doesn't know much about, I think. And so the way it works is Alex doesn't know who this person is yet, but I'm going to give him some clues. And audience, you listen and see if you already know, but see if I'm giving good clues. I want to start with this clue. Now, this clue has a bit of a visual and an audio component. Are you ready, Alex?
I am. I hope you're talking about Johnny Appleseed. Is that it?
You got it. You got it. Wow.
That was one of the ones when we first started this, that was on my list.
I finished my apple. Yes, Johnny Appleseed. What do you know about Johnny Appleseed, just as a primer?
I can picture a book when I was a kid, and he had like a pan on his head or a pot on his head.
Right.
I don't know why, now that I think about it. And he was kind of dancing.
Yeah, and that's jolly fella.
Yeah, but all I know, I feel like he maybe planted a lot of trees.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like he was maybe American.
Yeah,
but I don't think it goes much deeper than that.
Well, you probably saw the Disney cartoon about him, I think from 1943 or something, called The Legend of Johnny Appleseed. We'll get into that in a minute. But yes, you are spot on with all of that. I'm so glad that my clue, and for those of you who couldn't tell from the sound, I ate an apple. I took a bite of an apple.
Now, eating a pear would have sounded exactly the same.
No, pears aren't nearly as crunchy.
Yeah.
Pears are soft. You wouldn't hear the crunch of a pear. Please.
The good ones are soft.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if it's not ripe yet. But no, Johnny Appleseed was American. He was a little early for your favorite century. He was born in 1774 on September 26th in Leominster, Massachusetts. And at that time, that wasn't even in the U.S. So maybe he wasn't American. That was part of British America. Back before 1776, the Revolutionary War. He was born 2 years before that, and so he was part of British America. He didn't die until 1845 on March 18th. But one of the interesting things about him is, who are some other people you might think of along the same lines of Johnny Appleseed?
I don't know. What do you mean along the same lines?
I mean like American legends of the same. I'll give you an example. John Henry. John Henry the Hammer. Or Paul Bunyan.
Paul Revere.
Yeah, Paul Revere. Paul Revere, I think, was more of a real historical figure, whereas Paul Bunyan and John Henry were more legendary. But you're right, actually. Paul Revere, just like Johnny Appleseed, was a real person. Davy Crockett, that might be another good one, right?
Okay. Yeah.
These were these kind of larger than life people that were almost like social media influencers before there were social media influencers, right? Um, Paul Bunyan, he had an axe and a giant
Right.
ox, an axe and an ox. John Henry had a hammer. Davy Crockett had a rifle. But what did Johnny Appleseed had? He
A pot
was
on his head.
he had a pot on his head, and he also had apple seeds. He was a nursery man. Have you heard that term, nursery man?
No. I mean, I
So,
guess I have.
sounds like
Sure.
an insult,
Nurseryman.
doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Which basically means that he planted seeds and grew these trees up to a certain size where they could either be replanted in orchards. Now, the difference between a nursery and an orchard is where the trees permanently grow and give their fruit. A nursery is where they're first planted and brought up to the point where they can be moved to an orchard.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. He introduced apple trees to Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, as they say, West Virginia, and even parts of present day Ontario, Canada.
Did he do this on his own or did somebody ask him to do that?
No, so interestingly, we'll get into that story about him, um, about how he got into doing it, but he did mostly do it on his own. Yes, he was actually also a missionary for the New Church. Now, the New Church was a religious movement at the time that was also called Borg Swedenborg Swedenborgian. You ever heard of this one?
No.
So there was a guy named Emanuel Swedenborg, and he was a scientist in the 1700s. And he actually later in life, so he was doing, chemistry and biology and lots of sciencey stuff. He actually tried to locate the human soul. He thought he could physically find the human soul within a body. And he obviously, well, I don't say obviously, he never found it. He never found something that he could point at
No,
like
it's
the spleen.
obvious.
I think
Sure.
for a long time I think for a long time they thought the small intestine was the soul, but that was proven wrong. Anyway, it kind of gave him this sort of religious bent, this Swedenborg guy, and much like Mary Baker Eddy, at the time, who kind of claimed to know a lot about the Bible and Jesus and all that, he started writing books. So the Swedenborg wrote quite a few religious books in the 1700s, including one titled Heaven and Hell, another one titled The True Christian, and this is my favorite title, Apocalypse Explained. And Johnny, as a youngster, as a young man, got a hold of these books and became a fervent believer of the Swedenborgian church, also known as the New Church. And so his mission actually in life was not just to plant the seeds, but he also planted the seed of the new church as he went around and evangelized. So it was kind of a dual pronged approach. He got you with the apples and he kept you with the Jesus.
I got it. Yeah.
So his mother died when he was 2 years old. In And then in 1780, I guess he was about six. His father, whose name was Nathaniel, remarried a woman named Lucy Cooley. Which, by the way, that's about the coolest name ever, Lucy Cooley. Don't you think?
I mean, Johnny Appleseed isn't too bad either.
Yeah, yeah. Well, his father remarried Nathaniel Appleseed. By the way, his name was actually Chapman. John Chapman was Johnny Appleseed's real name. Um,
Which means that I might be related to him because if you remember the Pilgrims episode, that's the Mayflower side that I'm related
from the
to. So I
Chapman
could
side.
be, yeah, I could be an Appleseed.
Oh
Or
man. Well, we're gonna get to a part about his ancestors, so stay tuned for that. But his father remarried after his mother died, and he had a half brother named Nathaniel Cooley Chapman. And when Johnny was 18, and Nathaniel Cooley Chapman, his little brother, who was 11 at the time, little half brother, he convinced him to go west with him. Everybody was going west, and so he said, "Nathaniel, let's go west." And so the two brothers, Nathaniel Cooley Chapman and John Chapman, went out on a great adventure They left their father and their family and basically lived like nomads for quite a few years until, gosh, I guess until 1800. So about 8 years, 9 years, they were living like this. There isn't a whole lot documented about what they did, but they went to California, they kinda traveled around, and eventually, the father brought his family to Ohio where he met up with his boys, where he met up with, Nathan Jr. and with, John, and Nathan Jr. decided he was gonna go ahead and stay and help his father start a farm in Ohio, whereas John kept traveling and eventually ended up under the apprenticeship of a man named Mr. Crawford. Now, can you guess what Mr. Crawford did for a living? In context.
Was he a nurseryman?
He grew apples. He was an apple man.
Okay.
And in 1800, at the age of 26, John Chapman planted his first orchard and in Licking River, Ohio, and he kind of got to be in love with this whole thing. So he tended to this orchard for about 6 years and finally got the wanderlust again and decided to go out and embark on a voyage down the Ohio River using two canoes that he had tied together. And he took with him a bunch of apple seeds with the intent of growing, spreading apple seeds around. Now, a lot of people, um, first of all, think that he planted these things randomly, but he didn't. He actually created these little not orchards. He actually created these little nurseries on people's property. And as I said, a nursery is where you germinate the seed, it grows up, it sprouts, but you also have to protect it. So you have to build a fence around it to keep the wildlife away, to keep the cattle and other grazing animals away, and you have to tend to it. So what he actually did was he started this business where he would go around to people's property. He would plant the seeds for them, and set it up with some protection so that it would survive. And then he would make rounds every year, 6 months to a year. He would go back and tend to it and trim them and get them bigger. And then when the saplings got big enough, the farmers would sell these apple trees and John would get a commission from the sales. So that was kind of his deal. And that he also sometimes would trade that service for a plot of land that the farmers would have. So they might give him 2 or 3 acres on their property that he could plant this nursery or even plant an orchard eventually, but his payment would come later in the form of the land. So he was kind of planting seeds for his future, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, yeah. Nice metaphor. Now, why apples? Why is this because of the food, or because they're pretty, or because they provide shade? I mean, why? Why was this important?
You know, that's a great question, and I don't think it was ever really, said in all the stuff that I read why he picked apples. I think the seeds grew pretty abundantly and pretty naturally in the soil. I also think they were sort of an innovative thing, and at the time, a lot of people, that old saying, "An apple a day keeps the doctor away." Apples were very much, they were sweet, they were easy to transport, some of them keep for a long time. I think there was a practicality to it that
Yeah,
that
they're probably
drove.
pretty hardy too for the northern winters,
Yeah, yeah.
as opposed to like oranges, which didn't grow up there.
And remember it, the whole time he's doing this, he's not only planting these apple seeds, but he's also preaching about the new church, right? So it was almost like he used the apples as an excuse to meet people and to do business with them, but then he would preach to them. And um a lot of people didn't mind. As a matter of fact, a lot of people would put him up in their homes because he didn't have a home. He didn't wear shoes. And as you said, he actually would wear that tin hat. Well, that was a mush pot. It was called a mush pot at the time. So it was designed, he wore it on his head, but when he wasn't wearing it on his head, he would use it as a mush pot to make apple mush or uh, any other kind of mush he was going to eat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I might be more into that if it wasn't on his head, but
Well,
um,
remember, he's a one-man show, he doesn't have a horse or anything like that, he's walking barefoot, so it was a convenient way to carry his mush pot, and it protected his head. As a matter of fact, there were several instances where trees fell, he's out in the forest, and the mush pot actually protected his head from cracking open.
oh, nice, like a hard hat.
Yeah, yeah.
And you're right. As I picture him, In the Disneyfication version of him, he does have bare feet and overalls.
Yep, yep, and he's singing the song, "Oh, the Lord is good to me, and so I thank the Lord for giving me the things I need, the sun, the rain, and the apple seed. The Lord is good to me."
Was this in the Disney version, or is that really made in it?
Both, both. Actually, it's funny, we used to sing that at camp, and I had no idea it was a song from the Disney film, but it is. He sings about that. And it's funny, that film has a very Snow White kind of vibe because there's little birds chirping around him, and he's singing to the birds, and you hear them singing. Do you remember all this from just, like,
Was
coming
it
back to you?
was it a cartoon or live action?
It was a cartoon. It was
No, I
Disney.
don't remember that. I can just remember a single image. I don't remember
If
anything.
you Google that, if you Google the movie, the story, Disney, the story of Johnny Appleseed, you'll see this little thing on YouTube. And it's like I said, it's got a very, Snow White kind of vibe, very happy, beautiful thing.
You've called him John a few times. John Appleseed is a whole different guy. You know what I
Um,
mean? Like, the name Johnny makes him much more beloved than John Appleseed, evangelist.
well, it's funny you say that because in 1822, the very first letter that was written from a member of the new church describing a small, quick, restless man with his beard not too long, but unshaven, and bare feet and sparkling eyes, who lived a rough life in the forest, referred to him as John Appleseed. So the very first time he was called John Appleseed by a church member who was writing a letter. I think the first time it was kind of really made famous was when it was written in Harper's Magazine. So Harper's had a monthly magazine, and they basically talked about this man who was like a primitive Christian who went around and preached the gospel and planted apple seeds. That was that at that point they called him Johnny.
Got it. He was still alive then.
Oh yeah, he became
They were writing
famous.
about him in the present tense. So he was
Yes.
famous when he was alive.
Yes, yes, he became sort of a folklore legend at the time that he was alive, and as a real person. So that's what's kind of interesting, when you talk about Paul Bunyan. I think Paul Bunyan was a real person, but I think there was a lot of exaggeration about him. I think with, Johnny Appleseed, it was pretty much stuck to the truth about him, with some indulgence, of course. There's a pretty famous story where he was walking along and came across a missionary preaching to an open air congregation in Mansfield, Ohio, and the preacher was talking about living like a primitive Christian. He said that because people today are becoming spoiled and extravagant with their indulgences like calico and tea. and and so this man said, where now is the man who, like the primitive Christians, is traveling to heaven barefoot and clad in coarse clothes?" And then right at that point, Johnny Appleseed walks up, puts his bare foot up on the stump that he was using as a pulpit, and says, "Here's your primitive Christian, sir." And
Yeah. How about them apples?
so there was a lot of debate about whether John Chapman, aka Johnny Appleseed, was actually sort of this folksy pushover of a man, or if he was actually a really good businessman. And a lot of people say he was actually pretty smart in his business dealings because he ended up with thousands of acres of land at the end of his life that were worth, a lot more than the apple seeds he had originally taken out. It just took him a long time to accumulate all those things, right? He was very much a saver for the future.
How long did he live?
He died in 1845. He was born in 1774. So let's do a little math on that. 40 plus 26. 45 plus 26 is what? Uh,
71 or so?
71. Yeah, pretty ripe old age for that time.
Yeah. Those all those apples.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you could say, and probably some clean living. He definitely was. And also, I think he was purported in legend to have had a pet wolf that would follow him around, um,
Was that in the movie?
that he helped after healing. healing the wolf's leg. I don't know. I don't know.
Now that would be a movie.
Yeah, A Man and a
Now you
Wolf.
got my attention. Forget about the apples.
He also is reported to have actually put out a fire that he was using to stay warm when the fire drew a mosquito into the blaze, attracted it and burned it. And he couldn't stand the idea that he had destroyed one of God's creatures.
Oh,
So
really?
he put out the fire. He also is reported to have actually built a shelter in a hollow log and then left and came back to sleep in the shelter to find that it had been occupied by bear cubs and a bear, and he let them have it. He didn't try to chase them away. He let them sleep.
Wow. No, that's pretty amazing that a guy, a nurseryman, as you put it,
Yeah,
um, would be so kind towards insects. Because you'd think that those people that are in that world, that's their nemesis,
true.
right? Pests, because that ruins their crops. You wouldn't think that you'd think not only a mosquito, but any kind of thing that would damage his apples
Yeah,
would
those
send
little
them.
worms that get in the apples,
Oh
right?
man, everybody hates that.
Yeah, but I think he was more of an evangelist first, a sort of man of
Yeah,
God and God's
he wasn't
creatures.
selling the apples or anything,
He was kind of selling the apple trees, right? He planted the
selling the
seeds.
trees.
Um,
Yeah.
he was a vegetarian. He also never married, and it's said that he often said that he knew if he couldn't find his soulmate on earth, he would find his soulmate in heaven. Um, and so, just pretty nice. You know, I think the kind of guy that would get beat up today.
Well,
I mean, if some guy showed up and wanted to plant some apple trees in your yard and didn't ask you for money, and if he asked if he could sleep in your grass, and he was barefoot, would you call the cops?
well, it's the timeshare aspect of it where he'd want to plant some apple seeds, but first let me tell you about the word.
Right, right.
Um,
The new
right.
church
Yeah, that it's that part of it that probably would not
be
be the thought of.
challenging. Yeah.
Well, so was he nomadic? Like, did he have a place to live, or did you just go from one town to the next his whole life?
He was very nomadic. He went from town to town, and again, because he was always checking in on these nurseries that he had set up. So he had kind of a rotation between all those states I mentioned at the beginning. I think he was primarily from Ohio, though, or maybe Fort Wayne, Indiana. Those were two places that are often mentioned and associated with him.
But this is probably all horse and buggy, right? I mean, this isn't we
Well,
don't
on
have
him, it was
cars.
for him, it was foot, all on foot.
From state to state
Yeah,
like that?
yeah, yeah,
Man,
just walking along barefoot, even.
yeah, and you say he wasn't married. What a surprise.
Well, he passed away on March 18th, 1845. There was a obituary printed in the Fort Wayne Sentinel on March 22nd that said, on the same day in this neighborhood, at an advanced age, Mr. John Chapman, better known as Johnny Appleseed, passed away. The deceased was well known through this region by his eccentricity and the strange garb he wore. He followed the occupation of a nurseryman and has been a regular visitor here upwards of 10 years. He was a native of Pennsylvania, we understand, but his home, if home he had for some years, had been in this neighborhood of Cleveland, where his relatives live. He is supposed to have considerable property. He is supposed to own considerable property, yet denied himself the common necessities of life, not so much perhaps for lots of old timey words here, avarices from the particular notion of his religious subjects, his religious beliefs. He was a follower of Swedenborg and devoutly believed that the more he endured in this world, the less he would have to suffer and the greater would be his happiness hereafter. He submitted every privation with cheerfulness and content, believing that in doing so he was securing snug quarters thereafter.
I find it odd that he was so famous. that I feel like if somebody did that today, well, today they would have a TikTok and they would have,
Right.
they would be live streaming everything. But
Right, right.
forget about the
They'd have a
social media
Sprinter
aspect.
van, a converted Sprinter van.
So imagine in the days before that, somebody just going from town to town planting apple seeds, why that would make him a celebrity and why you and I would know about him 250 years later.
It's probably all the songs and all the poems. There's a lot of poems and songs that were written about him. And but yeah, I mean, it's his brand of what he did would not be popular today, unless he was doing it ironically. That's probably the only way he'd be able to get away with it is to be ironic.
I mean, you see people now that like do things, walk across the country for charity or something, we never don't even know those people's names. Um, I remember during the last World Cup, there was a guy that was going to dribble a soccer ball from one end of the country to the other, and he went like 11 miles and got hit by a car.
And if cars had existed back then, Johnny Appleseed might not have been as successful, but thank God there weren't any cars, Even the horse and buggy couldn't keep up with him.
I just don't know why he was so famous.
Yeah, well, I mean, so famous that he has a park named after him in Fort Wayne, Indiana. There's a Johnny Appleseed Festival in Lisbon, Ohio. There's another Johnny Appleseed Festival the third week of September in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And that one, you can only eat what was available during his lifetime. It's all sort of retro.
Oh, that we should go to that. That sounds fun.
In 2008, the Fort Wayne Wizards, which was a minor league baseball
Yeah.
club, changed their name to the Fort Wayne Tin Caps.
No.
And in their first season with the new names, they won the league championship, and their mascot was named Johnny.
Okay. I'm into that. I would like to go to the festival where you can only eat things that were,
Right.
as long as they didn't make the apple mash with pots that have been in people's
Well,
heads.
it goes on your head. You have to bring your own.
Oh, I'd be all right with that.
Okay, yeah. So you'd be grossed out by eating a pot off of my head, but eating one off your own head, you're fine with.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, there's schools named after him. There's memorials and all kinds of statues in Ohio and Cincinnati, and um, there's certainly a lot of. There's even a musical that was written about Johnny Appleseed.
And think about it too that he was famous at the turn of the century, right? The turn of the 19th century, right?
Yeah, the mid 1800s.
Mid
Yeah,
1800s. So who else was famous around then? Was that Houdini's time?
I think Houdini was more contemporary than that, wasn't he?
I have to go listen to this
Yeah, yeah.
episode again.
If anybody knows,
Give me an hour. Hold on, I'll be right back.
yeah, there was a abolitionist named Lydia Maria Child who wrote a poem about him, and it went. This is not written by ChatGPT, by the way. It's written by an 1880 abolitionist author named Lydia Maria Child. In cities, some said the old man was crazy, while others said he was only lazy. But he took no notice of jibes and jeers. He knew he was working for future years. And if they inquire whence came these trees, where not a bough once swayed in the breeze, the answer still comes as they travel on. These trees were planted by Appleseed John. Appleseed, comma John.
That absolutely sounds like Chat GPT.
And an 1880 abolitionist author, woman, no less, at the time. Yeah, it's funny. Maybe she was well ahead of her time. So, with all of that said, he was known for doing good. He was a good guy by all accounts. Um, Supposedly today, there is still one tree that was a direct descendant from his trees.
Only one.
Well, one that's known, one that's famous.
Hmm. I would expect there'd be entire orchards that would be descendants.
Yeah.
But I guess those things were raised for housing developments and shopping malls.
Actually, hold on, I got that wrong. It isn't a descendant. It was planted by Johnny Appleseed. It's
Oh, wow.
still a tree that there's one tree left planted by Johnny Appleseed.
That's
And
cool.
you you wanna know the type of apple it is?
Yeah, yeah, tell me.
It's a Rambo apple.
Ooh, I've never heard of that.
I hadn't either. So, Rambo is a greenish yellow skin. It's got kind of a dull grayish bloom of a flower, reddish gray. They ripen in late fall, and they're actually not very good, but they're useful for things like feeding livestock and, um, not not really all that great of an apple.
I was gonna say, I bet you the livestock disagree on that.
But you know how there's certain types of apples that humans eat, and then there's other types that are more designed for apples.
Yeah,
So David Morrell, who actually was the author of the book First Blood, um, he supposedly named the guy John Rambo after an apple that his wife brought home from a roadside stand.
that's cool, except for the apple wasn't good. Literally a bad apple. Oh, it was literally a bad apple,
Yeah.
just like Rambo.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, so the
Oh.
Rambo apple. So here's the thing though, is partly because of his religious beliefs, John Chapman, aka Johnny Appleseed, did not believe in grafting. Now, are you familiar with that concept? Grafting. I mean, you're probably familiar with the concept, but why you would do that?
No.
So they would graft different types of apples together to get a better flavor. It's kind of natural selection almost,
Oh,
unnatural
sure,
though.
sure, sure.
So
Yeah.
so you know, kind of like when animals breed and the
Mhm.
strongest attributes come through, when you graft plants together, you get the strongest, so you get the hardiest plants, you get all of that sort of thing. But a lot of people back then, and maybe even today, still consider it playing God to graft
Right.
things.
Texas A&M does a lot of this. They made a maroon carrot because they don't like the color orange. They recently made, a jalapeno that isn't spicy. They do a lot of this kinda stuff.
I mean, both of those
No,
sound
this
pointless.
well, but that's what they do.
So the thing is, though, that's interesting is that um, some people actually attribute Johnny Appleseed, the man who it's not really known, by the way, if he abstained from alcohol or not, but because for the most part, his apple trees weren't grafted; they were just whatever seeds he had available. So they were more of the sort of apples you don't want to eat kind of variety. Um, might feed to livestock or just might not taste that good. They were used to make cider, and it's kind of said that that was one of the gifts he brought to the frontier was the fermentation of alcohol because uh, they could make alcoholic apple cider from these apples.
And he didn't drink that though, to
I
our
don't.
knowledge.
It's not known that wasn't mentioned. But interesting, especially if he was a teetotaler, that he would have been responsible for bringing so much alcohol. Now, I've got a few facts about apples that I think you might find interesting. You want to hear?
And by the way, I grew up on non-alcoholic cider. That is some good stuff. We used to have a cider mill near where I grew up, and you'd go there in the fall, and you'd have cider, and then they'd have these donuts, these like cinnamon donuts with that cider, warm or cold cider. That's good stuff.
So we always have to bring it back to The Simpsons, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember this, but Ned Flanders had a handy rhyme for telling the difference between cider and uh, juice, apple juice and
Oh,
apple cider.
what's that?
If it's clear and yellow, you've got juice there, fella. If it's tangy and brown, you're in cider town.
That's a good rule of thumb, Ned.
Yes, thank you, Ned Flanders.
I like cider a lot more than juice, but that's good stuff.
Yeah, well, it's if it's clear and brown, or if it's
And I like
tangy and brown.
the alcohol version of cider,
Yeah,
um, is great.
shout out to
Love it.
Austin East Ciders. Maybe they want to sponsor us.
Yeah, that's good
They
stuff.
make a good apple. As a matter of fact, you can make. We just had St. Patrick's Day. Of course, this is airing much later than that, but you can make a nice snake bite or crown float or black black velveteen, depending on what you call it, which is half cider and half Guinness. Good stuff.
Yeah, let's do it.
So apples make up half of the world's deciduous fruit tree population. Did you know that?
Deciduous meaning like indigenous, but fruit.
No, deciduous means that they shed their leaves.
Oh,
Deciduous trees are ones that shed their leaves or shed their fruit. Like basically, they go bare. They're not evergreen. So when it
got it.
comes to deciduous fruit, apples are half of it. Take a guess at how many type of apple varieties are grown in the U.S.
Oh man, well I'd never heard of Rambo, and then I would say it's got to be like in the dozens,
Higher.
mm, hundreds,
Higher.
thousands.
2,500 varieties of apples are grown in the U.S.
Wow, wow. I
2,500.
wonder why we need that many.
Why do we need so many apples? Uh,
What's the best one? What's your favorite?
I am a big fan of the Granny Smith and
Yeah,
Gala.
yeah.
How about you?
What is the one? Crisp. What is the one? It's
Well,
crisp.
there's Honey Crisp,
Yeah, I think that one.
Pink Lady.
I like.
There is a Pink Lady.
Yeah. If you listen to our variety show episode, we talk about Pink Lady and Jeff. Um, the, I like a good tart green apple. That's good
That's a
flavor.
Granny Smith. Granny Smith is a
Yeah,
tart green
right,
apple. That's exactly
right.
what it is.
But then I like the crisp one, um, with like with pie or like with a slice of cheese. That's
Okay.
pretty good too.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't want to do a tart one. I mean, so there's different, and I love apple pie. That's my favorite.
Well, so here's something that's going to blow your mind. Apple pie, even though it's called American as apple pie, it's actually a European dessert.
Like strudel, you mean?
It came from England, yeah,
Oh, okay.
Germany. I mean, it was not invented in the US. So,
Yeah.
while we might claim it, just like French fries being American, apple pie is
Mm.
not really American. Uh,
We
apple.
perfected it.
Okay, yeah, yeah. I'll
Maybe
take
we were the first ones to put ice cream with it.
I doubt it, but okay. We'll go with that.
Because the term a la mode is
Yeah, it's
American.
French term. So apples contain a chemical called malic acid, and that's actually a very um, beneficial thing, and that's part of what people say helps make apples so healthy is that malic acid. Now it's good for fibromyalgia. Isn't that fibromyalgia? Isn't that what
My myalgia,
fibromyalgia? Isn't that what uh uh well, Will Smith's wife has that, Jada Pinkett.
alopecia.
Oh, that I'm getting those mixed up. What is fibromyalgia?
Yeah, that's a nerve disorder, I think.
Oh, I thought it was hair loss. Never mind. Anyway, malic acid, good for you. Um, very high in fiber. As a matter of fact, they say that one apple has twice as much fiber as you need for one day. So eating an apple a day really does keep the doctor away in that case.
Hmm.
And you want to just take a guess how much a bushel of apples weighs?
Well, how much is a bushel? Like, how many apples is that? Is that like 50 apples or like 100 or
you
like
know,
5,000 apples? I don't know.
dummy here didn't really. I don't think it's done by the number of apples. I think it's done by volume. So it kind of depends on the size. I'll tell you this: you can
So
make.
the answer is whatever the answer. I mean, the
Yeah,
answer how much it weighs is defines what a bushel is, right?
yeah. It's the universal answer to everything.
A lot.
42 pounds.
Hmm. Oh yeah, yeah.
42 pounds is one bushel. With that, you can make 21 pies, 3 gallons of cider, or 20 gallons of applesauce.
I love applesauce.
I
Put a
don't.
little cinnamon in there. You don't.
Crisscross applesauce. I do not.
You don't like applesauce. Oh, really?
No. Here's the thing, though. You're kind of getting ripped off when you buy apples, a bushel of apples. You know why? 25% of apples is made of air.
Well, I thought you were gonna say the core.
No, although I will say that I've actually taken to eating the apple core, and it's not bad.
Ugh, come on, man.
Everything but the stem.
But then you get those seeds that Johnny used to you get them in your stomach.
Right? They'll sprout out and you'll have apples growing out of your head.
Yeah, don't you worry about that?
I don't. I actually, when I was a kid, I did have a little bit of fear of that, but I've overcome it.
I
Um,
do not eat the apple core.
well, that's what they call hardcore.
So it's mostly air and water probably.
Yeah, a lot of water, but that's the reason apples float, right? Because you can use apples in bobbing for apples because they have a lot of air in them, so they're very.
Oh, yeah. Did you ever bob for apples?
I've done that. It's very difficult.
Overrated, right?
Yeah, yeah, really. It's one of those things that probably should be a dead end.
Fine line between bobbing for apples and being waterboarded.
That's how they finally got Johnny Appleseed. They bobbed him until he told the truth. Turned out he was a Canadian spy.
Yeah, I like the caramel apples also.
Yeah, those are
You ever have
good. Those
caramel
those
apple?
can be
Yeah.
dangerous if you have a loose tooth, though.
Not a fan of candy apples.
Me neither. Me neither. I'm not a fan of that kind of harder candy, but the caramel apples. I mean, I like caramel, and that goes well with the apple.
And you make a sheet, you buy them in like a sheet, and
Hmm.
then you make them yourself, you roll it in there.
Oh man,
Yeah,
man,
that's good
I'm gonna
stuff.
have to do that. I feel like because I feel
Yeah.
like if that gets you to eat more apples, it's probably a net health benefit.
The caramel
Yeah,
apples?
yeah,
That's good
it's
stuff.
offset. Yeah. So back in the day, too, there were things that Johnny would carry called seed balls. Now, have you heard of those? They're also called
Mm-mm.
Nendo Dango in Japan.
No.
So these are actually, rather than just individual seeds, these are made with clay and other organic matter, maybe some dirt, some sand, stuff like that to help assist in the germination. It's a clump of seeds that you put together, and it was originally done back in like the feudal days of Japan, and also in Egypt they would do this when they were planting along the Nile because it flooded. It was a way of protecting the seeds and keeping them from washing away.
So you just roll them in clay
Clay,
and then
dirt, I guess there's other hummus or humus, compost, all these kind of things, and they become a little more impervious to being washed away, and they also germinate more easily. But there's a thing called seed bombing where you make these seed balls and then you uh, actually can just kind of throw them anywhere. And because they're sort of self contained, as long as it's not just like you didn't throw them onto a piece of concrete, they'll actually germinate and grow just about anywhere. They really help these things. They also deter like predators from eating them, birds from eating them because they're in this ball. And by the time they get big enough, the bird doesn't want to eat it anymore.
no, I never heard of that. That makes sense though.
Well, this led to a thing in the 70s uh, called guerrilla gardening. Have you heard of that?
No, I'm not much of a gardener.
Well, this wasn't gardening done by gorillas. It was gorilla, not gorilla.
Right.
Um,
It sounds like kind of like the wildflower experiment in Texas.
yeah, yeah. This is where they would take in New York City and places like that. They would actually toss these seeds, these seed balls, into empty lots and any place that was really ugly where there was dirt, and they would toss them in, and these things would grow. Sometimes they would have like tomato seeds in them, sometimes grass, sometimes flowers, but they would basically beautify things by tossing these seed balls everywhere.
Yeah, that's what they did with wildflowers in the Texas roads in the 60s, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and now look at it. I mean, actually, we're kind of approaching the height of it right now while we're
Oh,
recording
yeah.
this, but I'm sure they're all dead by the time people are listening. Um, yeah, so that if you wanna kinda get a vibe about Johnny Appleseed, you can certainly check out the Johnny Appleseed, The Legend of Johnny Appleseed, Disney film from the '40s. Um, and then you can also go drink some cider and some apple
Mm.
juice. You can make yourself
Austin East Siders.
Austin East Siders. Yeah, we got to get them to help us out. I got a couple of quotes to wrap up with though from Johnny Appleseed. But just tell me, what are some highlights of things you've learned about Johnny Appleseed today?
That it was less about the apples and more about the evangelists evangelizing. That he was a nomad,
Yeah,
never really settled, just kind of wandered
a
from
happy
place to
nomad.
place. That he in today he would have gotten beaten up.
Well, and here's the thing: is he probably would have just ran with it because he had a quote that said, "Do not worry about being worried, but accept it peacefully."
Hmm.
There's your little bit of zen for the day.
Hmm.
There
Yeah,
you have it. Johnny
there you
Appleseed,
go.
American legend in the truest sense of the word. I do think we should go visit one of those Johnny Appleseed museums or festivals. Maybe, like you said, maybe the festival where you have to live like they did back then. We'll bring some seed bombs or some seed balls, and we will wear a pot on our head, and we'll eat some mush, and we'll have a damn good time.
For the people watching alone, I think it'd be worth it. There's probably also some great bands at that festival. Like I'm picturing like some bluegrass.
True.
Um, Unless you think it's super religious. Like, is that part of the festival? Is it sponsored by the new church?
I would say very much in line with the way Christmas has gone. While Johnny Appleseed had a religious connotation back in the day, I don't think that's what people celebrate today. I think today they celebrate him being one of the earliest conservationists and somebody who really seemed to have a kind heart and care about nature, and he did it through his love of God and his religion, but he certainly was a unique fellow who didn't get out and just try to exploit everything. He tried to plant rather than just take.
What happened to the new church? Are they still around?
Yeah, it's still around. It's still around. It's I don't think it's called new anymore since it's been so long. I think it's
It's just called church?
yeah, it's
Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
I think it's called the Swedenborgian Church.
Oh, yeah.
Swedenborgian. If you I actually looked it
Much
up.
better name.
Yeah, yeah, after this guy Swedenborg. Well, I'm gonna get a copy of Apocalypse Explained and try to read that, and next time I come on, I'll try to explain the
Yeah,
apocalypse
when you
to you.
said heaven and hell and apocalypse explained, I thought you were talking about AC/DC records.
True, true. Or 60s war movies.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, man. Well, that's Johnny Appleseed. Thanks, everybody. And remember, if it's clear and yellow, you got juice there, fella. If it's tangy and brown,
You're in Cider Town.
yes,
Isn't that
sir.
it?
Yeah, that's it.
Lord, there goes Johnny Appleseed. He might pass by in the hour of need. There's a lot of soul drinking from the well, locked in a factory.